I'm going to read chapter 13, in which Pass foretold Lucy the new fruit that fortune favored the brave. Before reading chapter 13, I'll talk about chapter 12. And Mr. Freeze, Fogg, and Pastor and Sir Francis arrived at Galway, and from Bombay to Galway. And then the conductor said to them, and the railroad cut. And so the Mr. Fogg and his company should travel with another way from Galway to Allabadad. They tried to find how to go. And also Sir Francis were about the traveling around the world in 8 days. But Mr. Fogg didn't care about it because he expected something happened. Maybe he already knew the railroad about the railroad in India from Bombay to Calcutta is quite long distance. According to the Guinness Book, maybe I think the train company in India hired the largest employees in the world. I guess so, because India is very wide, and then most land is population. India is the second largest population in the world, next to China. Okay, to the point. So Patatut found the elephant. And then they thought elephant could be good transportation for them. So and then they negotiated the price, the elephant, and then they were off to Allabadad, riding on elephants. They passed through the dense forest. They met an Indian tradition, and Mr. Fogg found a woman who were supposed to be sacrificed on tradition. So he decided to save the woman. Quite interesting. And then I saw the video clip or the movies, and then the woman was sacrificed alive by burning, and this looks like old tradition and history. But now I don't know exactly. Okay, I'll read it, and then with narrator.
2 Days by Jules Verne. Translated by George Makepeace Towell. Chapter 13, in which Passepartout receives a new proof that fortune favors the brave. The project was a bold one, full of difficulty, perhaps impracticable. Mr. Fogg was going to risk life, or at least liberty, and therefore the success of his tour.
But he did not hesitate. He found in Sir Francis a comparative enthusiastically as for Passepartout. He was glad to do anything that might propose.
Oh, his master's idea charmed him. He perceived a heart, a soul, under that icy exterior. He began to love Phileas Fogg. There remained the guide. What course would he adopt?
Well, take part with the Indians, and therefore of his assistance, it was necessary to be assured of his neutrality. Sir Francis frankly put the question to him.
Officers, replied the guide, I am a Parsee, and this woman is a Parsee. Command me as you will. Excellent, said Mr. Fogg.
However, resumed the guide, it is certain not only that we shall risk our lives, the horrible tortures if we are taken. Let us proceed, replied Mr. Fogg.
Mr. Fogg, I think we must wait till night before acting. I think so, said the guide.
The wealthy Indian then gave some account of the victim, who, he said, was a celebrated beauty of the Parsee race and the daughter of the wealthy Bombay merchant.
She had received a thoroughly English education in that city, and from her manners and intelligence would be thought European. Her name was Allabadad.
That often she was married against her will to the old lodger of the burned corn, and knowing the fate that awaited her, she was taken and devoted by the lodger
to the sacrifice from which it seemed she could not escape. The Parsee's narrative only confirmed Mr. Fogg and his companions in their generous design.
It was decided that the guide should direct the elephant toward the pagoda of the villages, to which it approached as quickly as possible.
Halted half an hour afterwards in a Parsee, some 500 feet from the pagoda, where they were well concealed, but they could hear the groans and cries of the fakers distinctly.
They then discussed the means of getting at the victim. The guide was familiar with the pagoda of the parish, in which he declared the young woman was imprisoned.
Enter any of its doors while the whole party of Indians were plunged in a drunken sleep, or was it safer to attempt to make a hole in the walls?
This could only be determined at the moment the place themselves, but it was certain that the abduction must be made that night, and not when, at break of day, the victim was led to her funeral pyre.
Then no human intervention could save her. As soon as night fell, about 6 o'clock, they decided to make a reconnaissance around the pagoda.
The cries of the partners were just seizing the Indians were in the act of plunging themselves into the drunkenness that caused by liquid effluent mingled with the ambient.
Possible to slip between them to the temple itself.
The Parsee, leading the others, noiselessly crept through the wood, and in 10 minutes they found themselves on the bank of a small stream, whence, by the light of the lodgings and torches, they perceived a fire
on the top of which lay the embalmed body of the Raja, which was to be burned with his wife.
The pagoda, whose minaret loomed above the trees in the deepening dusk, through the 100 steps away. Come, whispered the guide.
He slipped more cautiously than ever through the brush, followed by his companions. The silence around was only broken by the low murmuring of the wind among the branches.
And soon the Parsee stopped on the borders of the greatest, which was lit up by torches.
By groups of the Indians, motionless in their drunken sleep. It seemed a battlefield strewn with the dead. Men, women, and children lay together.
In the background, among the trees, the pagoda of the villages loomed distinctly.
Much to the guide's disappointment, the guards of the lodge, lighted by torches, were watching at the doors and marching to and fro with naked sabers. Probably the priests, too, were watching within.
The Parsee, now convinced that it was impossible to force the entrance to the temple of the Mystic Father, led his companions back again.
Phileas Fogg and Sir Francis Cromarty also saw that nothing could be attempted in that direction. They stopped and engaged in a whispered colloquy.
It's only 8 hours that the brigadiers and these guards may also go to sleep. It's not impossible to return to Parsee,
returned the Parsee. They lay down at the foot of a tree and waited.
The time seemed long. The guard ever and wrong. They left them to take an observation of the edge of the wood, and the guard watched steadily by the glare of the
torches, and a dim light crept through the windows of the pagoda.
They waited till midnight, but no change took place among the guard, and it became apparent that their yielding to sleep could not be counted on.
The other plan must be carried out. An opening in the walls of the pagoda must be made.
In the main, thus 10, whether the priest or watching by side of theirs became, as I scarcely said, were the soldier at the door.
For a last consultation, the guide announced that he was ready for the attempt, and advanced, followed by the others.
They took a roundabout way so as to get at pagoda on the rear.
They reached the walls about 12:30, without having met anyone. Here there was no guard, nor were there either windows or doors. The night was dark.
The moon, on a wane, scarcely left the horizon, was covered with a heavy cloud high up the tree defended the darkness.
It was not enough to reach the walls. An opening in them must be accomplished, and to attain this purpose the party only had their pocket knives.
Happily the temple work, or built of the brick and wood, which could be penetrated with little difficulty. After one brick had been taken out, the rest yielded easily.
They set noiselessly to work, and the Parsee on one side and Passepartout on the other began to loosen the bricks so as to make an aperture 2 feet wide.
And they were getting on after this when suddenly a cry was heard in the interior of the temple, followed almost instantly by the cries replying from the outside. Passepartout and the guide stopped.
Had they been heard? Was the alarm being given? Common prudence urged them to retire, and they did so, followed by Phileas Fogg and Sir Francis.
They again hid themselves in the wood, and wait till the disturbance, or whatever it might be, ceased, holding themselves ready to resume their attempt without delay.
Weirdly enough, the guards now appeared at the rear of the temple, and there installed themselves in readiness to prevent a surprise.
It would be difficult to describe the disappointment of the party, thus interrupted in their work, and they could not now reach the victim. How then could they save her?
Sir Francis shook his fist. Passepartout was beside himself, and the guide gnashed his teeth with rage. The tranquil Fogg waited without betraying any emotion.
Well, we have nothing to but go away, whispered Sir Francis. Nothing but go away. I could drive. Stop that Fogg,
said Fogg. I'll only do it Allabadad tomorrow before noon. But what can you hope to do? Asked Sir Francis. In a few hours it will be daylight, and
the chance, which now seems lost, manifested itself at the last moment. Sir Francis would have liked to read Phileas Fogg's eye. What was this cool Englishman thinking of?
No. Was he planning to make a rush for the young woman at the very moment of the sacrifice and boldly snatch her from her executioners?
This would be utter folly. It was hard to admit that Fogg was such a fool. Sir Francis consented, however, to remain the end of this terrible drama.
The guide led them to the rear of the glade, where they were able to observe the sleeping groups.
Meanwhile, Passepartout, who had perched himself on the lower branches of the tree, was delivering ideas which had first then struck him like a passion, and which was now firmly lodged in his brain.
He had commenced by saying to himself, "What folly?" And then he repeated, "Why not, after all? It's a chance, perhaps the only one, and with such thoughts."
Thinking thus, he slipped with softly serpent until the lowest branches the end of the bent almost to the ground.
Past, and the lighter shades now announced the approach of day, though it was not yet light. This was the moment. The
slumberings multitude became enemies. The tambourines sounded, songs and cries arose. The hour of sacrifice had come.
The doors of the pagoda swung open, and a bright light escaped from its interior, in the midst of which Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis espied the victim.
Cecile, having shaken off the stupor of intoxication to be striving, escaped from her escutcheon.
Heart throbbed, and convulsively seizing Mr. Fogg's hand, found in it an open knife. Just at this moment the crowd began to move.
The young woman had again fallen into a stupor caused by the fumes of hemp, and passed among the courtiers, who escorted her with their wild religious cries.
Phileas Fogg and his companions, mingling in the rear ranks of the crowd, followed, and in 2 minutes they reached the banks of the stream and stopped 50 paces from the pyre.
Upon which still later letters called in the semi-obscurity they saw the victim's quite senseless stretched out beside her husband's body.
Then a torch was brought, and the wood, heavily soaked with oil, instantly took fire.
At this moment, Sir Francis and the guard seized the first Fogg, who in an instant not generous was about to rush off the fire.
But he had quickly pushed them aside when the whole scene suddenly changed. A cry of terror arose. The whole multitude prostrated themselves, terror-stricken on the ground.
The old Raja was not dead. Then, since he rose up sudden, like a spectre, took up his wife in his arms, and descended from the fires in the midst of the crowd,
which only heightened his ghostly appearance.
Courtiers and soldiers and the Parsee with instant terrors lay there, with ears placed on the ground, not daring to lift their eyes and behold such a prodigy.
The inanimate victim was borne along by the vigorous arms which supported her, and which she did not seem in the least to burden.
Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis stood erect. The Parsee bowed his head, and the Passepartout was no doubt scarcely less stupefied.
The resuscitated Rajah approached Sir Francis and Mr. Fogg, and in an abrupt tone said, "Let us be off."
It was Parsee himself who had slipped upon the fires in the midst of the smoke, and then, profiting by the still overhanging darkness, had delivered the young woman from death.
It was Passepartout who, playing his part with a happy audacity, had passed through the crowd amid the general terror.
A moment after all four of the party had disappeared in the woods, and the elephant was bearing them away at a left place.
But the cries and noise, and the ball which whizzed through Phileas Fogg's hat, apprised them that the trick had been discovered.
The old artist's body indeed now fused upon the burning fires, and the priests recovered from their terror. So the abduction had taken place.
They hastened into the forest, followed by the soldiers, who fired a volley after the fugitives. But the latter rapidly increased the distance between them, and ere long
they found themselves beyond the reach of the bullets and arrows.
End of chapter 13.
Interesting story. But authors had an ideal man. There was an ideal man, had lots of ideas. He found elephant, he found how to save the woman, camouflage, disguised himself is a dead man. Am I correct? Anyway, done.